man. Thanks for coming, and that's your second time to be in Serbia. First time was 5 years ago, and how did you decide to come to Serbia and make a big story about Darko Miličić?
With Darko, it was an interesting thing. One of my responsibilities at ESPN is to look for interesting stories that are not obvious, that are not, the big news of the moment. And I had gotten an email from a friend of mine who's a big NBA fan, and he had seen like a thread on Reddit, the website Reddit, that had mentioned a story in the Serbian press that talked about how Darko was a farmer now instead of a basketball player. And I had never heard anything about that. I didn't know anything about that. And he just sent me this, my friend just sent me this link that was like, hey, Darko's a farmer now. What do you think about this? Could be interesting. And so I mentioned it to a couple of bosses of mine at ESPN, and they were all like really intrigued. They were like, what's the deal? This is a guy who was a top draft pick and an NBA player for 10 years, and now he's a farmer. We have to find out what the situation is. I think at first everybody thought that he was a farmer like with, animals like, cows and pigs and things like this. And we didn't know that he was a vegetable farmer, but then I reached out to a couple of people, including you, to say, hey, what's the story? What's going on with Darko in Serbia? And we were able to make a connection with him and come to Serbia and spend a week learning about what his life had become.
What did you think about Darko before and after making the story?
Before I met Darko in person, I thought about him the same way I think a lot of people in America did, which is that he was a really unsuccessful NBA player, which was a disappointment because he had been such a high draft pick. And so that was really all I knew about him. I knew that he had a lot of expectations and didn't really live up to them, and that there was a lot of anger and emotion both from him and from all the fans of the teams that he played for. Then after I met him, I learned a lot about his motivations, what led him to come to America, and then what led him to come back to Serbia and try to start another life. And it was really fascinating to learn about all of the things that went into how he saw himself as a basketball player, and then how he saw himself as a father and a husband and a farmer and a Serbian.
Maybe he has some bad kind of image in USA. Did you change narrative about Darko in USA?
I don't know if our story changed the narrative completely. I mean, the bottom line is, if you're a basketball fan, he wasn't a successful basketball player in the NBA. And if you were a fan of the Pistons or the Celtics or the Magic or the Knicks, you could be frustrated by the idea that he didn't deliver on the expectations that everybody had for him. But I think that for all the people that saw or read the story that we did, it did give them a different understanding of the idea that he is a person, that he's not just a big, tall Serbian basketball player, but that there is something more inside, and that the measure of whether somebody is a success or failure as a person has a lot more to do with what they're like in their life after they're playing sports than what they're like when they are playing sports.
Also, he was so happy to see you again now, 5 years later.
Yeah, it was wonderful. He and I have texted a little bit over the years, and I try to do that with a lot of the people that I write about. I think it's important to look at people, when you're a journalist, as more than just a subject, as an actual human being. And I spent a week in Serbia, and Darko invited me to his home, and I met his wife and his kids. And so that's not something where you would just say, okay, see you later, and never speak to somebody again. If somebody's willing to open themselves up to me and share things about their life with me, I will share things about my life with them. And, I don't know that we're best friends, but we're certainly something more than just a journalist who sits there and asks questions and gets answers back. And it was wonderful to see him this week and to hear about how he's been doing and his life and his kids and his successes and all the things that you would do with somebody that you have a relationship with, and that was really wonderful.
Also, you made a story about Bobby Marjanovic.
Yeah.
What's impression about him?
I mean, Bobby is a really interesting guy also, but in a very different way, you know. To hear about, there were some similarities hearing about him growing up in Bolivac, and the similarities with Novak growing up in Novi Sad during the wars and the NATO bombings, and how that affected him. You know, Bobby seems to have taken that on and tried to push beyond it and say, okay, I'm going to be positive, I'm going to be positive, I'm going to be positive all the time. And it was really interesting to hear from him about how that has allowed him to become this kind of figure in the NBA, that even though he's not a top player, everybody loves him. We had a line in the story that we did about Bobby that was like, he's your favorite player's favorite player, because everybody in the NBA seems to love him. It was really remarkable to understand how the positivity that he has and the personality that he has made him one of the most beloved players in the entire league.
Your main reason is Novak Djokovic background of his growing up. What did you find in Serbia?
I mean, I think one of the things that I've learned, I've been very fortunate to travel to a lot of cities in Eastern Europe. I've been to Belgrade, to Novi Sad, to Skopje, to Tirana. To Ršac, yeah. All of these places. And I think one of the things that I've learned is that there is a real disconnect between the way people in Eastern Europe see their stars, their famous people, and the way people in Western Europe or in the United States might see those people, and the way that we as Americans or Westerners understand what it's like to grow up in this part of the world. And so one of the things that was really interesting to me about Novak, when I was asked to do a big profile of him, I felt like I had to come here, especially when he's here, because coming from Belgrade and growing up in Serbia, he's a global star now. He lives in Monaco and in Mallorca and has houses in America and all over the world. But Serbia is his roots. Serbia is where he came from. And it's a big part of shaping who he is. And so being able to be here and go to the apartment building where his grandfather lived and go to the school where he grew up as a young boy, it helps me to understand more about who he is and how he's become the kind of person that he is today.
Also, how do you see Serbian point of view of Novak Djokovic?
I mean, I was at the match he played last night against Laslo Djere, and Laslo Djere obviously is a Serbian as well, but there was no question that the crowd was almost entirely for Novak. One of the taxi drivers that I had earlier this week, I asked him, do you like tennis? And he said, even if you don't like tennis, in Serbia you like tennis because of Novak. There's no doubt that he is somebody that everybody here takes real pride in, right? I mean, he is an ambassador for Serbia. He is out in the world representing this country, this place, this part of the world. And I think there is an intense pride that really is easy to understand when you visit here, that Serbians feel for Novak.
Did you find out that he grew up earlier and became more mature than other just because of the circumstances of living and war times?
Yeah, I think it's a common thing. Honestly, with Darko and with Bobby too, you know, you can be 13 years old, 14 years old, and all of a sudden you have to act like an adult because you are a top sports figure. You know, for Novak, it's traveling to tennis tournaments and spending time in Germany. For Darko, it was going to Hemo Farm. For Bobby, the same. And these are, I mean, I haven't been 15 years old in a long time, but when I was 15, it's hard for me to imagine that I would have been able to do the kinds of things that we ask athletes to do. And so, yeah, I think there's no doubt that Novak had to grow up very quickly. And sometimes there are some challenges with that. Sometimes it takes a little while to find your own maturity, to find the thing inside of you that is authentic, that is who you are. And even though we demand athletes to be adults early, they're still not. They're still kids. But they find their way, and Novak found his way. And I think there's no doubt that all of the experiences that he had as a teenager, where he had to be mature and had to take the pressure of being such a good tennis player onto his shoulders, all of that has helped him to understand more what it's like to be a famous athlete now that he is older.
Can you tell us what does your friends think about Novak, American generally, their opinion and point of view of Novak?
I think that, you know, tennis in America is what we would call like a niche sport, like a sport that is not as popular as the NFL or the NBA, but the people that follow tennis follow it very passionately, very similar to golf, let's say, or even to hockey, to the NHL. These are people that are really into the sport and follow it all the time. And so for those people, they know everything about Novak. They know about his incredible success. They know about nearly making the Grand Slam. They know about all of this. But I think there is more of a casual sports fan population where they didn't necessarily know too much about Novak. Maybe they know, you know, he is one of the better players, but they don't know everything about his success. But obviously, everything that happened in Australia in January, that was a mainstream story. That was a news story. That was on not just sports channels, but on CNN and on ABC and the regular news. And so all of a sudden, these casual fans that maybe had heard his name before but didn't know much about him, everybody followed that story because coronavirus obviously is a big focus of the media. And when you have a crossover between entertainment or sports and this big news story of the pandemic, those two things make for something that's going to be very visible. So when I told people that I was coming over to do a story about Novak, if they were tennis fans, they said, "Oh my God, Novak, that's amazing, he's the best player." And if they weren't big tennis fans, they said, "Oh, this is the guy from Australia. What's the deal with him right now?" And I said, "Look, that's what I'm coming over here to find out."
Yeah. Also, we were talking about that privately, about Nikola Jokic and the fact that he is not a superstar like some American players or Joel Embiid. Do you think there will be maybe more respect for him if he is a player of Lakers or Philadelphia, maybe as a player of Denver from Colorado?
I think the Nuggets are. I mean, look, Denver is a big city. It's not like it's Portland or one of the tinier cities, Sacramento, in the NBA. Denver is a big city and a big part of the league. But I think there's no question that when you talk about superstar players and the ability for them to break through, there's two things. One is incredible success. I mean, the bottom line is Giannis is playing in Milwaukee and he's still a global superstar. It hasn't hurt him that he's playing in Milwaukee, but he's had incredible success. Jokic is playing in a smaller market and has had a lot of success, but maybe not to the same level personally and as a team as Giannis. And I think you need one of those things. Either you need to be playing in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago or a big market like this, or you need to be an incredible superstar on the level of Giannis, let's say. And Jokic is he's at a city that is not quite the biggest, and he's had incredible success, but not quite to the same level as Giannis. And I think if one of those things changes, then he will break through and kind of be that sort of massive star the way those players are. But he needs one of those things to change.
We are following a lot of Denver, Colorado local media, so it is obvious they are angry because they are not covered like other teams, even when they have an MVP. Do you think that's unfair?
I don't know. I mean, it's hard for me to say, you know. I think that, you know, you would probably say the same here in Serbia. Media a lot of times follows the stories that people are interested in hearing about, you know. If there was incredible traffic and interest in a particular thing, then generally the media will do more about that thing, you know. Like I said, I don't think Giannis suffers for media coverage, even though he's in Milwaukee, you know what I mean? And Tom Brady, the NFL quarterback, when he went from Boston, which is one of the huge media markets, to Tampa Bay, there was still quite a lot of coverage of him, you know. I think that a lot of times I understand where the idea that, hey, it's Denver, it's not getting the same coverage. I understand where that idea comes from, but I think that generally in the media, we go where the story is and where the interest is. And if the interest continues to rise with Jokic and with the Nuggets, then I have a feeling there will be even more coverage of them.
Yeah. Also, Is he interesting for you, maybe for the third coming to Serbia or not?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think I've told you before, you know, for me, I don't do a lot of sort of day-to-day coverage. Most of my work is on projects and personalities and profiles. And yeah, Jokic is a really interesting personality. And obviously, like I said, I think athletes that come from parts of the world where Americans don't necessarily have the same understanding that they do of like France or England is always interesting to me, you know. I've been lucky to do stories in places like Brazil or Macedonia or Serbia, and I really find those rewarding because I'm not only able to tell the audience about this person, but also about this place that maybe they don't know so much about.